From Bias to Equality podcast is brought to you by the CEO magazine, Holman Webb Lawyers, and B2Bi.
Hello, and welcome to my podcast, From Bias to Equality. I'm your host, Sandra D'Souza. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to have a conversation with Jacqueline Butler.
Hello, Sandra.
Hello. So Jacqueline is a seasoned finance professional with diverse international experience. She started her career in audit at Arthur Andersen in London and later became a CFO. I interviewed the then CEO of Nick Science, Judith Mitchell, for my book From Bias to Equality, as Nick Science qualified for Alex Stars, being one of the very few ASX-listed companies with both a female CEO and CFO at that time. Jacqueline's journey includes working in banking in Latvia, owning a French teaching franchise, and joining a chartered accounting firm in the UK. In Australia, she took on roles from accounting to becoming a part-time CFO for an exploration company, which later turned into a full-time CFO and company secretarial position. As global CFO of Nick Science, she contributed to the company's successful ASX listing and played a key role in its growth before departing in May this year. Now, Nick Science is an emerging company with innovative solutions to combat biofilm-related issues. Non-drug, cost-effective approaches are safe and don't contribute to antimicrobial. Thank you. Resistance. They are building clinical evidence to establish their prophylactic wash as a standard in surgical procedures, including health outcomes and reducing healthcare costs. So, Jacqueline, thank you again for being part of this podcast and also correcting me.
It's okay. Thank you for having me.
So, I know that we just touched on a little bit about your background and that you're not with Nick Science anymore, but I think our listeners would really love to hear about your journey of how you your fascinating journey, which is not the typical linear type of pathway to where you are now. So, if you could share with us, that'd be great.
Sure. So yes, you are correct. It's a rather unconventional route to being a CFO. I started in audit in Arthur Andersen in London, and then shortly after qualifying as a CA, I got married, and my husband, who was working for a Swedish telecom at the time, they bought a company in Riga in Latvia.
Wow.
And so I found myself as a newlywed in Latvia, not speaking Russian or Latvian, but I did want to work. So I did find a job with Parex Bank, which was the largest bank in Latvia. And I had to help the traders get higher trading limits with the European banks. And also Moody's and Fitch rated the bank. And so I was their point of liaison between the two because I could speak English in that role.
Wow.
So I then had my first son in Latvia. And then shortly after that, we moved to the UK and I had my second son. And then when the kids were little, I wanted to do something with a bit more flexibility.
Yeah.
In those days, there wasn't so much flexibility around working parents. And also I wanted to do something a bit entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
So after uni, I'd spent a year in Paris learning French at the Sorbonne.
Wow.
Yeah. So using my French, I bought into a French franchise, teaching French to kids after school. And then I employed teachers and taught in I taught in various schools around the sort of Richmond, Twickenham area in London. And then my husband is Canadian and he didn't like England much, I'm afraid, with the weather, the constant drizzle and the grey sky.
Yeah.
So we were thinking we would maybe move back to Canada, or we visited his brother and sister-in-law here in Australia one May, and it was beautiful the whole of May. And so we
went, thought that was the weather.
6 months of winter in Toronto, or this beautiful weather here. So that's how we ended up here. And at that stage, I sort of hadn't been in finance for maybe 4 or 5 years and had no Australian experience. And so it was hard, I suppose, getting my first finance role, but recruiters wouldn't even look at me and, job ads, it just wasn't even worth applying for. But networking and contacts helped. And I think it was somebody from my sister-in-law's mother's group that heard about.
There goes mother's group.
Absolutely. And she knew one of the directors of Azure Group who was saying to her one day, I just can't get good, staff talent. And she said, I know somebody. And so I'm always very grateful to Michael Derren who took a chance on me. and employed me, and I ran their accounting division, the financial reporting division, and then their outsourced CFO division.
Wow.
And then I had my third son, went off on maternity leave. And then when I was on maternity leave, one of the audit partners from the Mazars, who audited the clients that I was involved with, reached out to me and said, there's a tin and gold exploration company that's a client of ours. They want to list on the ASX. They need a part-time CFO. How about it? So I said, okay, sure. And then that role evolved from a part-time role to a full-time role. And then I ended up taking the company secretarial role on that as well. I listed them on the ASX.
While raising 3 kids.
Yes, but it was, what was good about the role was it started off part-time and then it ended up sort of full-time. And so I stayed 7 years.
Oh, okay.
And so it was a really sort of supportive environment in that sense. And then I from there I then applied for a job at Next Science, which is biotech, and helped list Next Science on the ASX, and that it's been more of a scale-up journey. So when I started, there were sort of 20 people, 2 in finance, and then over the last 5.5 years, it's by the time I left, it was like 110 people, maybe 10 in finance. So helped list them on the stock exchange, and then grow globally with the focus mainly on the US.
Yeah, well, for the listeners who may not know this, so I just unbeknown to both of us, I interviewed your boss at the time, Judith Mitchell, who's the CEO of Next Science, and she was a really impressive woman, and she was very much she cared about like everybody, her workers, throughout her career, not just at Next Science, and it felt like she built up a very beautiful, I would like to say, working environment. I know I didn't work there, but the impression I got and her philosophy with how she did it. So and then I guess Judith has recently retired. She made the announcement that she was retiring.
That's right. And they appointed a US CEO when Judith retired, and off the back of that, then they appointed a global CFO based in the US. To say that now, in fact, they've closed the Australian operations and sublet the office in Chatswood. So so I've handed over the reins now to a new global CFO.
Cool. So I guess this is going to be an interesting podcast because I would like to ask you around the time that you were at Next Science. And the book has obviously the interview with Judith, but the podcast is going to talk to the second most important person in the company at the time, which is you. And so the reason why I guess I reached out to Judith, because at the time the business qualified for Alex Stars. And it was actually quite rare to have a woman CEO and CFO.
In an ASX company. I think we were one of the few
in listed companies in general.
I think we were one of the few.
And so I mean, I guess I would love to hear from your insights as the CFO is how I guess, do you remember, like, was there initiatives or how did it all kind of like you feel the company managed to qualify?
I think it helped that when Judy and I both started together in November 2017, and as I said, there were only like 20 employees at the time, and they hadn't even formed a formal board at that stage. So I think it helped having a mature female CEO to sort of set the company culture from the get-go. And everything else fell in place from that. So, then there were 2 male directors that they had in line. Then Judy made sure that she was interviewing other directors that were female, and then Aileen Stockberger, who used to be the mergers and acquisitions lead for J&J, she became a director. And then I suppose Judy, in looking for a CFO, made sure that she was interviewing both males and females. And then from there, she just created a culture where family was important. So it was definitely a culture of performance. You needed to do your job and meet your deadlines and deliverables. But equally, she did have a real focus on family. So it was her that would say to me, it's one of your son's, whatever it was, prize giving or something, make sure you go to that. No, you're not going to remember in 10 years' time that you were at some kind of business meeting.
Yeah.
He will remember that you weren't there.
That's true.
And you will remember that you weren't there.
Yeah.
So just make sure you go.
She was very big with that. And she actually said something, which I think it's included in the book, that she said that, not in these exact words, so I'm not memorizing it, but something along the line like, everybody's replaceable at work, but you are irreplaceable in your family.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me, Kathleen.
Yeah. And she believed that. And even like up until recently, I went over to the UK in December, and my dad had a really bad fall and ended up in hospital for a month.
Oh, wow.
And just Judy was brilliant. She just said, just take as long as you need. She never put any pressure on me. It was coming up to the year-end audit. We're ASX listed. But
there's a lot of pressure.
Said, just take as long as you need. So I ended up staying a month in the UK and staying with my mum and going back and forth to the hospital. And, but I got the audit done. I got them a clean audit. But so there's a bit of give and take as well. So she set the right culture. But equally, I then performed because, I didn't want to let her down.
Yeah. And I think that's the, in a way, an ideal culture that by caring for people, that they want to make sure that
they don't let you down.
They don't let you down. Give back. Yeah. Okay. So in the questions, I guess, in general, like, do you feel like that your values are in sync with Judith in terms of gender equality? I mean, what are your values and beliefs around gender equality?
Yes, so I strongly believe that gender equality helps with the bottom line. Not just gender equality, I think sort of diversity in general. And you'll be familiar with the McKinsey 2015 study.
Yeah.
That showed, I've got it here, the companies in the top quartile for gender diversity were 15% more likely to have better financial returns, and those with ethical diversity, 35% more likely. So it's ethnic. What did I say?
Ethical.
No, ethnic diversity. So it's not some frou-frou thing.
Yeah.
It does actually,
it's
result,
numbers.
Yeah, and it helps with your competitive position. It helps with attracting top talent. But as I say, I think it's diversity in general, in broader sense, even, cultural background, class, socioeconomic, neurodiversity.
Yeah.
You and I have spoken about before. One of my sons has dyslexia. He might be really bad at spelling and slow reader, but he is such a creative thinker and is able to come up with a great problem solver. Comes up with left field answers. So I think, companies need to embrace that as well, so that you're not getting this group think where
everybody thinks the same.
Everybody thinks the same, and then there's no creativity. And so I think diversity in general is super important.
Yeah, and I'm nodding, but I know you don't get nodding sounds in the podcast, but so even though I guess the focus of the podcast and the work that I'm doing is around gender equality, it's very much it is, the end goal is diversity. And I just wanted to put a side note here why I'm focusing on gender equality is because, I want to deal with the issue that we have 51% of the population are women and we're an underrepresented group. And so let's tackle the...
So you can tackle that first, and I have a long list of things.
That's right. All right, take that one, then we're going along the list of all the diversity thing. So I guess, do you remember the time when you were going through, I guess, the recruitment and in senior leadership recruitment and boards? Firstly, like, did you feel the support of the board in terms of whether it's, the initiatives from Judith or from yourself with the type of, diverse leadership team or company that you guys wanted to lead?
Yes, so I think, again, because Judy was the CEO and she was a female, so I think she really set the tone from the top. And then in terms of recruitment, and I think you've spoken to me before about, getting a panel and making sure there's diversity in the panel so that you're not getting the same thing.
It's in the book, yeah.
Yes. So I think that that's tricky because each divisional head would obviously you're recruiting for skills.
Yes.
So you want to bring on board somebody that's going to, pick up the job quickly and doesn't need too much hand holding.
Yeah.
And so, whoever that divisional head will be, they will be the person involved in the recruitment. So that you're not always getting a balance of males and females, which resulted in, for example, the operations team, they were all men.
Oh, okay.
And I had the opposite problem, that in my finance team, there was only, by the time I left, there were about 11 in finance, only one was a male.
Okay.
So I had to actually purposely, when I was recruiting, make sure that we were interviewing males as well as females. So I think, I always think it's interesting with orchestras, some orchestras, how they do the blind audition, which I think is really, it's a good method. I don't really know how we translate that yet into corporate, but
blind CVs. I mean, there's also discussions around blind CVs of so that see those details and then just look at the skill set. And research have shown that candidates with more diverse background, with diversity, are the one who tends to be selected for the roles.
Yeah, so I think a blind CV in terms of male, female, but also probably the name.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because
there's no name. There's
unconscious biases around names and things.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then, what was it? Were there also a push or a KPIs around for the leadership team in terms of diversity and rolling it out for?
So being an ASX listed, as you know, because I guess you've done the elect stars for the ASX companies, you are required to publish your diversity stats in your, I think it's Appendix 4G annually. And so you have to talk about, I think, the number of females on the board, in executive positions, and then overall as a company.
Yeah.
Which I think Next Science in general did quite well. I think they might have had 50% or more females overall as well in the company. So so there are those stats that are published, and having them published holds you accountable. And then obviously the REM committee, the remuneration committee, set their own internal targets. And
so it was very much that the KPIs and everyone's tasked who's responsible to make sure that all that is cascaded down. That it's not just, even though you have an all men operations team and all female finance team, but seeing the whole company as a whole, to make sure that this diversity and balance was very much entrenched into the culture. Cool. And you talked a little bit about the interview process. Do you want to expand on, was there specific strategies and things to help recruit? Because I remember Judith talked about also, she was very proud of having women in the more technical roles as well. And I guess, how was that achieved when it's always challenging?
We had a VP of regulatory that was a woman.
Yeah.
So I think it was, recruitment was, as I said before, it was mainly to do with skills. Like, does the person have the skills?
Yeah.
But I think it didn't hinder that we, did have these diversity stats, which probably then meant that female talent was applying for these roles, whereas they may not have before.
Yeah.
And then you do, which can be an issue with, getting female talent to the table.
That's right.
So that helped. And then they had the skills, and then you were able to interview them, and then, some of them got the roles. So
okay. And I guess I'm having a think. You just said, obviously, that it was a startup being 20 to growing to over 100.
Journey,
So with the changes, were there any resistance to the diversity targets or anything like that of trying to implement the vision of Judith?
No, I don't. Not really. There wasn't resistance. I think she's you've met her, so she has a lovely personality, and I think she brought people along the journey well. So no, I didn't. There wasn't much resistance.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, that's really good. And so I guess with this is not part of the question that I've prepared for you, but I want you to share the story. I am.
Terrible.
No, because you have talked about this before.
Yes.
So you were at the book launch. You didn't know that Judith was.
No.
You came to the book launch because of Magda, who was part of the book.
Correct.
And
she
you
invited me to the book launch.
Yep. And then you were very kind and you bought my book and then on your way home. Do you want to tell how that all happened?
Sure. So Magda, who is the CFO and COO of Holman Webb Lawyers here in Sydney, she had said, my friend Sandra's having this book launch. Would you want to come along? So I did, and it was a great evening.
She didn't say that she was in the book either, or?
Oh no, she did.
Okay,
she said she was in the book, and she said no about 15 times.
Yes, I did,
and said, "Oh my gosh, what can I do to just make sure that you actually, even if you record yourself and I'll type it up, I want you in the book," which was great. She was one of the, I think, best stories in the book. So then on the way back home, I bought the book, and then on the way home, I was flicking through. I read Magda's chapter, and I kept flicking, and then I was like, "Oh gosh, it's Judith." So I'm texting Judy going, "Oh, you're in this book. I've just been to the book launch." So it was really funny. And then I was texting you going, "You never guess what?
Yeah.
You interviewed my boss."
And how funny is that? They interviewed your boss, and she kept it quiet.
She did.
Yeah.
So at the time she was, in the last year and a half, she was based in Jacksonville, Florida.
Yes. Yeah.
Hence why I guess maybe she didn't mention it.
I guess
I don't know. Yeah.
And I think she's one of those wonderful people who don't kind of feel like what she's doing is something special, even though it's really special. So but she's a really lovely lady. So I guess I could just keep talking to you all day, Jacqueline, but I do have this final question to ask you, which I ask everyone. What is your advice to other CEOs who are struggling to achieve diversity in their company, even though they want to or need to?
I think companies need to broaden their mindset in terms of roles and offering part-time roles, and also offering flexibility around a role. I think part of the problem is why you're either getting really talented females, junior females that are rising up, they leave when often get married, have kids.
Yeah.
And there isn't the flexibility, and that if they do want to do part-time roles, so it's a great problem because it's a big brain drain. So I think a broader mindset in terms of that. I mean, in my own experience, that was me.
Yeah. I mean, you did your job well, because you had a part-time role.
Yeah.
And you still have
it was an ASX listed, but I still managed to do it and deliver it and excel in that role. So I think broaden the mindset in terms of that. I would be really interested, I don't know if there are any studies yet, but with COVID and now how, hybrid working is more popular, how that has changed, whether women are not dropping out as much as before. It would be a really interesting study.
I would be interested in that as well. But also there is the shift, more so the start of this year, and I think it's continuing, that there is a push for companies to revert back.
There is, and as with all things in life, I think a balance is good. And certainly for my own team, so long as they're hitting their deliverables and their deadlines, then they have to go home and pick up a kid from school and then log on later. That doesn't worry me. So long as they're doing their job and they're doing a good job. I'd much rather that than a mediocre employee. So I think that's one thing. And then I think also probably within companies, you do need a champion of change, whether it's a female or a male who is, driving through that diversity message. And, coming back to our friend Magda, she's doing a fabulous job at Holman Webb doing that, because she's tapping female talent on the shoulder and saying, come on, you're ready. You should put yourself forward for that promotion. When even they themselves might not feel ready. She's saying, no, you're ready. So a champion of change like that, I think really helps. Yeah,
that's very good advice, actually. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Oh, my pleasure.
I really appreciate you coming all the way here. And this is the first time we're doing it in person together. rather than through Zoom. And I appreciate you coming all the way to my office and having this podcast interview and giving us some incredible insights during your time at Next Science.
Thanks, Sandra, for having me.
Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by our wonderful sponsors. Firstly, we're sponsored by B2Buy. B2Buy is your trusted business buying platform that simplifies and automates your buying process, helping you buy smarter and faster, giving you greater visibility and value. With 100,000 products in one place, B2Buy is passionate about connecting diverse suppliers with corporate buyers, so you can create a more inclusive business environment and buy better with www.b2buy.online. Our second sponsor is Holman Webb Lawyers, an award-winning and dynamic full-service Australian law firm with offices in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Adelaide. Not only do Holman Webb offer comprehensive legal services, but they are also a proud recipient of the LX Star, recognizing their commitment to achieving gender equality in leadership. Discover more about their services, initiatives and industry-leading insights at www.holmanwebb.com.au. Lastly, our sponsor, the CEO magazine, is an iconic, global media brand that inspires and promotes excellence within the business world. It is a source of information, inspiration and motivation for the world's most successful leaders, executives, investors and entrepreneurs. Go to www.thecomagazine.com.